For number 2, use the fact listed here at the end. And if you think about it, that means that the sample mean is going to be right in the very middle of your confidence interval. So use that information. You should be able to answer number 2. For number 4, they give you the size of the sample, the sample mean, and they give you the population standard deviation. And then there's 2 things you're supposed to find. So the part A and B here, a 90% confidence interval for A and 99% confidence interval for B. And with the given information, since you know the population standard deviation, you can look at page 342. There's a nice little box here telling you how to find a confidence interval for the population mean when you know the population standard deviation. There's a formula down here to find the maximum margin of error, E. And you're going to need to know critical values. Table 3B you can use, or the appendix. 3B is just 1 page back. If you go back to page 3, well, 2 pages back, page 340. Oh, too far. Let the page load here. Page 340. Here, for all the different levels of confidence, the critical values are listed. So part A wants to find a 90% level of confidence, and part B is 99% level of confidence. Refer back to number 5 to get some of the values you'll need. But for number 6, you're trying to find how large of a sample you need for a given confidence level, 99%, and for your sample mean to be within 2 points of the population mean. So if you look at page 345, there's a nice little box that explains the whole process, because you're trying to find the sample size needed to estimate the population mean, and this value is given to you in problem 5. And so again, you'll have to look up a critical value from that table on page 340. And your maximum margin of error is specified in number 6. They tell you how big of error you want. So plug all those numbers in and you should get a value for how big of a sample you need. There's 2 parts for 8. The first part, you just need to verify that the sample mean is 15.8. It rounds to 15.8. And that the sample standard deviation rounds to 3.5. So you can just use Excel, type these numbers in, and figure out what their average is, their mean, what the standard deviation is, the sample standard deviation, and just verify that those numbers are correct. For part B, you're computing a confidence interval for the population mean based on our sample, but nowhere in the problem does it tell us what the population standard deviation is. So you have to go to section 8.2. On the bottom of page 353, it talks about finding a confidence interval for the population mean when you don't know the population standard deviation. So continue down to page 354, and the formula's there. It's pretty similar to what was in 8.1. But to find your maximum margin of error, you have to use the student's t distribution and your sample standard deviation. And n is the size of your sample. So it tells you right here you're going to use table 4 of the appendix to look up the critical values using the student's t distribution. And notice that your degrees of freedom is 1 less than your sample size, n minus 1. So let's take a quick look at table 4. It's on page A10 in the back of the book. The confidence levels are listed across the top. So if you want 80% confidence, you would go to the 80% column. If you want a 95% confidence, you would look at the 95% column. And you just go down to your degrees of freedom. This numbers over here, these numbers correspond to the degrees of freedom. So if you had 10 things in your sample size, the degrees of freedom is 1 less than that. You'd be looking at the row 9. If you had 20 things in your sample, your degrees of freedom would be 19. So you would look at that row. So find the critical value in the table that you need, and then plug it in to the formula we looked at on page 354.